Hi, everybody. Welcome to Module 5. Thanks for coming. Welcome to you at home as well. I'm excited about today. Today, you're going to get some information that's going to it's going to take you deeper into the philosophy and practice of meditation. But before we get to that, before we really take a deep dive and understand how meditation and mindfulness can be therapeutic, what we're going to do is a little bit of a review of last week. And last week, primarily, what we talked about in aggregate is we talked about self-making again. Remember the neuroplasticity that we were talking about? And we showed the slides of the neurons, and that neurons, when they fire in a group, there is some stability. The network has a stable aspect in that it's constructed in a certain way, and like all of us, our brains are constructed the way they're constructed. And so that configuration and the way in which our neurons have a habit of firing produces a very stable sense of self and very stable patterns that we recognize as self. Okay? Now, the self, however, that's a dynamic thing that's actually an idea. Remember we talked about last time as well that what the self really is a story. We go out into the world, we see and hear things, we think and feel, and then that story, it's very multimodal, and this recording device records all of our experiences, and the way we think of ourselves is the thought of the self is actually touching that story, but that story's all in the past. And it's been conditioned by what we've seen and heard, okay? Now, the strange thing is that story isn't who we are. We could change. There's a potential to react differently to things that are past triggers, thoughts, and sensations. That's all possible. But what it's going to take to do that is it's going to take conscious intention. You're going to have to decide to make a choice to, in a sense, get in a dialogue with yourself and that story so you can, in a sense, separate yourself. So there's a perceiving subject that is working with the triggers, thoughts, and sensations. Now, so this is a very, very simple feedback loop that shows that relationship. The neurons, that represents what's there and what's stable and what is producing sense of self. Sense of self is a story, but how that sense of self decides in his or her mind how he or she wants the future to be, setting conscious intentions, making choices, feeds back onto the neurons. The neurons behave differently. And that's how we can change ourselves over time. Make sense? Okay, good. So now, thought distortions. So we talked about the appraisal process last time, how when we're under stress, the stress is meaningful to us. Losses, threats, injustice, inadequacy, producing emotions, the story. Now, the appraisals become hardwired too. It's like what happens to us conditions us to see ourselves in the world in a certain way. And that means if we're not being mindful, if we're not watching, every time that those same conditions arise, we're going to have the same reactions to those conditions. So we'll have automatic thoughts. And automatic thoughts, that's voice in head getting stuck in mind, right? A thought distortion is when those automatic thoughts are making our lives worse. Automatic thoughts, thought distortions produce more and more suffering in us. Okay? So let me give you an example. When I was an insomniac, and I was a horrible insomniac, if I lied down and I wasn't sleeping and I had wanted to get to sleep, that experience of being there in similar conditions, because I've been there in the past, lying in bed wanting to sleep, I would have automatic thoughts. And my automatic thoughts were tinged with frustration, tinged with a lot of wanting, clinging to some circumstance that wasn't. And so then the frustration would produce more arousal in my mind-body network. Does that make sense? All right, and so automatic thoughts then produced a belief in me that was, beliefs are kind of like gestalts, like a collection of thoughts, and that collection of thoughts that I was an insomniac, I gave my identity to a pattern. Do you see? And now when I gave my identity to the pattern, how do you think that made me feel? Nervous, right? Scared. And so sometimes at 10:30 in the morning on a Sunday morning, the sun is shining, I have no contact with lying in bed. A thought would arise in my mind. And it's not like I asked myself, where I said to myself, hey, you know what, Mark? In the next moment, I want to scare the shit out of myself. Like, that never happened. I'm just doing my thing at 10:30 in the morning, and then the thought arises by itself, I wonder if I'm going to get to sleep tonight. And as soon as that thought, then there's a feeling. And so nervousness, now I can't stay focused on that the whole day. My attention wanders, and so I leave it behind. But then the sun is traveling through the sky, and then it's 4:30, and I notice that it's getting closer to the evening, and then the thought arises again, and now a little bit more squeezing. And by the time it gets to be 9 or 10, I'm all stirred up and nervous, and I regard a dark, cozy bed as an object of aversion. Like that whole dynamic is scary to me. And it all starts with this relationship between a perceiving subject, an object, and then the interaction between the two. All right. And then the beliefs, and then after the beliefs, the Mark is going to decide to cope with being an insomniac. And imagine how we modern humans cope with that. So I trundled myself off to the doctor, and guess what happened there? I got a pill, right? Okay, and so that's how I began to cope. Now, that developed a habit. I became conditioned to coping that way with that problem. And as you'll see, I'm going to teach you in this class that if we cope with the modern quick fixes, we're just making things worse, a lot worse, because we're actually disabling our capacity to recondition ourselves. Okay, good. You get all of this? So habitually distorted sense of self story keeps going, and ultimately what happens is these features of thinking arise when we really get wound up, catastrophizing, making things worse in our mind, thinking things are going to be the worst, and hypervigilance can't pull our attention away from this pattern, this relationship